Good afternoon, New York, and the rest of our listeners around the globe. My name is June Stoyer, and I'm the host of the Organic Tea Radio Show. Our podcast is available on iTunes, Zune, and you can also visit our website at www.theorganicview.com. If you'd like to be on the show or would like to find out about sponsorship opportunities, please contact us at questions@theorganicview.com. Today's show is sponsored by coronatools.com, the nation's leader in garden and landscaping tools. Listeners of the Organic View can receive 20% off their coronatools.com purchase by using the coupon code ORGVIEW. That's ORGVIEW. For more promotional offers, please visit our website at www.theorganicview.com. And don't forget to check out our contest section. On today's show, Tom and I have a number of topics that we would like to talk about, including the potential impact of dicamba drift on people, the French beekeepers' decision to ban sulfoxaflor, and are neonicotinoids now found in your tea? So I'd like to welcome to the show my co-host, Colorado beekeeper Tom Theobald. Hello, Tom.
Hello, June. It's a nice gray, cool day here. It's interesting because the weather dictates the life of both the bees and the beekeeper. And yesterday we had 70 degrees and sunshine, and I could have done bees if I'd had anything that needed to be done. Today, the bees will be huddling together snugly inside the hive and keeping themselves warm. And it's always comforting to think of that. You know, even though it's kind of nasty outside, the bees are just snug and cozy inside their hive.
Thanks, Tom. Dicamba drift has been in the news quite a bit lately, but there hasn't really been any talk at all about the potential impact of dicamba drift on people. And this is something that really should be part of that conversation. Don't you think, Tom?
Well, I thought of that just this morning. I got an email from a correspondent about a controversy in Argentina over whether or not neurotoxins are being introduced to the human population through inhalation or through nasal membranes. And it got me to thinking about dicamba. We've talked about dicamba, and it's been in the news quite a bit lately. And there seem to be two casualties as a result. The first would be the farmers who don't have GMO crops, so their crops, their soybeans, are susceptible to dicamba, and the dicamba is drifting and killing their crops. And the second that we talked about a couple of weeks ago is the drift killing all sorts of vegetation and cutting into the honey crop for beekeepers. But the email this morning got me to thinking about dicamba and many of the others. If dicamba volatilizes and it drifts across the landscape, the evidence that we have of that is dead or dying or injured plants. But what is the consequence for the human population of this drifting of these chemicals? Glyphosate, for example, is found almost everywhere. Now we're finding the neonics everywhere we look. We'll talk about that in a minute, about the tea. But I think there are many serious human health questions here that have yet to be examined.
I know that there are groups of people that are looking into the exposure. I'm pretty sure Pesticide Action Network is doing something, as well as some of the other NGOs. But the bottom line is, Tom, we're looking at so many different chemicals that are being removed because of the severe impact on the environment and on the pollinators. So it does make sense, especially since the pollinators are basically the indicator species. They're the ones that will have a severe impact that will be indicative of what is to come to us. So it does make sense that, human health really should be a concern.
We manage and monitor the honeybee, and originally when the EPA was first formed, the honeybee was going to be the poster child in pesticide safety, and it was believed that if we protected the honeybee, that we would in turn protect many other species from damage from these pesticides. And so the what was called the bee caution was put on chemicals that were toxic to bees, and basically the bee caution said, do not apply this product or allow it to drift to blooming crops or weeds if bees are visiting the area to be treated. And the thought was, if we protected the bees, we protected a lot of other things as well. And we've strayed far away from that. We've pretty much eliminated that bee caution with the steps that the EPA has taken, and we've talked about that in previous interviews. They have completely eliminated any protections under federal law, and they've done that through policy decisions and administrative fiat. We're faced with a system that is designed to promote chemicals. The EPA is the Environmental Pesticide Agency now, under the complete control of the chemical companies. They have been captured.
As many times as that point comes up, I think what's important to remember is the fact that EPA does show that they're covering their backs by having these public meetings, even though they're for the most part at the last minute, and also putting out the information, requesting public input. But at the end of the day, once again, we're looking at an agency that is really not taking into consideration the best interest of the environment and the species that they're supposed to be protecting, the pollinators, the animals, as well as us. And even with some of the new requests for public input, this is something that just really needs to change. Now, Tom, you have said numerous times that people really need to step up to the plate. They really need to start contacting local elected officials, contacting EPA directly, and demanding that they be more accountable for these chemicals that they're putting on the market.
Well, I think public television across the country has been running the series by Ken Burns on the Vietnam War. And that was my era. That's when I was a young man. And it resulted in enormous public opposition. And that public opposition had an influence on the course of events. And I think that we need something similar today with respect to chemicals. We've become the lab rats for this chemical experiment, and the chemical companies recognized very early on that the portion of the EPA that we deal with, the Office of Pesticide Programs, was critical to the success of their business objectives, and they began to work their way into the Office of Pesticide Programs very early on until now. Today, the Office of Pesticide Programs is simply an extension of the chemical industry. And most of what they do, most of their pronouncements, most of their comment periods, all of those things are just illusions to give the appearance that they're concerned when they aren't. I just yesterday learned that the reviews on the neonicotinoids have been put out for another couple of years. I think when we started talking about this, they were to have those reviews completed by 2012, and then it moved out a year or two, and then another year or two. The most recent was 2017. That became 2018. Now they're talking about having a decision, whatever that decision may be, in 2019. Why is this? Why are they so incapable of facing this enormous avalanche of evidence that these chemicals are terribly damaging to the environment, to the lower level life forms, and more we're beginning to find to human beings?
Well, that ties directly into our next topic, which concerns a chemical called sulfoxaflor. We've been talking about sulfoxaflor for a number of years now, and recently French beekeepers have denounced the use of sulfoxaflor. And what I find to be very interesting is that the French beekeepers really do step up to the plate and say, okay, we don't want this. And the agencies there that are responsible for the environment, they actually do pay attention and listen to them. Whereas here in America, we don't have that. Why?
Well, sulfoxaflor is an interesting story. It appears to be just another neonicotinoid. It's just in different clothing, and they're trying to present it as something other than the neonicotinoids, but it isn't. It has the same mode of action. It has some of the same chemical basis. And initially, the EPA was going to give sulfoxaflor a conditional registration. This is the ruse that they had used in the past, for example, with things like clothianidin. But if they were to have given it a conditional registration, obviously there would have been conditions, and we would have been watching, and they would have been challenged. So their decision was to try to get away with just giving it a full registration. By law, if they give it a full registration, they don't have to review that for 15 years. So this was the end run they tried to do around the law with sulfoxaflor. The beekeepers, I believe it was the Pollinator Stewardship Council, filed suit, and that decision was rescinded. But now what the EPA has done is they've used Section 18 to give emergency approval for different uses, and the EPA's efforts have not been to protect, but to promote. This is not agronomy, this is marketing, and we're on the receiving end of all this. They're finding these chemicals everywhere they look, and the EPA is trying not to look at all. It's a terrible situation, and the only thing that's going to change it is public outrage. If people listen to what we're saying and have been listening for the last 5 years and haven't become politically active, haven't begun to educate themselves, and haven't begun to speak out, then to that degree we have failed. Because we may entertain people every week and keep them advised, but if they do nothing more than go about their lives without getting involved in this, nothing is going to change. We're under the illusion that we have a system that will change if we just bring its shortcomings to its attention, that it will adjust and it will change. Well, that's not the case, because it's not going to change, and it's going to take enormous public involvement to produce that change.
Well, unfortunately, Tom, some people do pay attention to what mainstream media dictates, and at this particular point, especially since we've seen so many interviews circulated by mainstream media about the pollinator decline, what seems to be consistent is the fact that they address that there is something going on with the bees, but they never, ever attribute it to the use, or should I say the widespread use of neonicotinoids. And they are always very quick to get a comment from industry. So I don't know what it's going to take, but I do know that more and more people are aware of what neonicotinoids are, and they are furthermore aware of the fact that we need to do something to protect the bees. It's just people are not looking at the science. There's so much research that's been peer-reviewed and published. It's just baffling that people are not looking to that to get a better understanding of what's going on.
Well, I think maybe a growing part of the population is looking at it, but the people who are in a position to make decisions that would change the course of events are ignoring it, and the leading group there would be the EPA. They have simply turned a blind eye to all of this scientific evidence, and the chemical industry, for their part, keeps crowing about they want these decisions to be science-based and evidence-based, and that's fine as long as they can select the science and they can select the evidence. If you take an honest look at what the science and the evidence show us, what it shows us is this is an environmental disaster of massive proportions.
The last topic concerns the detection of neonicotinoid residues in tea leaves. This is coming out of China. What's interesting is that in a study that was published on October 27th by the American Chemical Society, apparently neonicotinoid insecticides are commonly used for pest control on tea plantations. And if you think about the application, it does make sense as far as why they are a choice for tea leaves, especially since tea is a very big commodity. However, it says neonicotinoid residues released from tea leaves into tea infusions pose a dietary risk to consumers. Therefore, a rapid, sensitive, and reliable on-site detection method for neonicotinoids is needed. And apparently they've developed some sort of technology that would help them detect, I guess they're using imidacloprid, imidacloprid, and clothianidin, and they're able to detect this in the leaves. But, once again, when you take a look at how neonicotinoids operate, do they actually, it's great that they can detect it, but what are they going to do as far as consumption, especially since you can't exactly remove it from the tea leaves?
Well, I think the most ominous bit of evidence is what's come out of Germany within the past couple of weeks, and they had been keeping track of the biomass of flying insects for the past 27 years, and what they have found is that the insect biomass in natural areas, these are natural areas, not farmland, but natural areas, has declined by 75% in the last 27 years. Now, these are areas that you would think would be immune, or at least to some degree immune from the effect of these chemicals, but apparently are not. And the likelihood is that a major player in this decline in the insect biomass is the neonicotinoids. This is a massive environmental disaster, and the EPA has chosen to turn its head at every opportunity. They don't want the public to know what a disaster they have been a participant in. They don't want you to know, and it's time that the public begin to demand answers and begins to demand performance from these people.
Well, Tom, we'll see what happens. To be continued. Thank you so much for joining me today. As always, Tom, these are discussions that need to take place on a broader scale.
Well, thank you, June, for providing the opportunity. And once again, thank you to the listeners who take the time to listen to what we have to say. We may not have all the answers. We may not even have all the questions, but we do our best.
Thanks, Tom. And folks, if you are a beekeeper who has sustained tremendous losses due to the impact of neonicotinoids, please write to us at questions@theorganicview.com. Or if you have any other questions, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you for tuning in. This has been June Stoyer with the Organic View Radio Show. Have a great afternoon.